Good afternoon. I hope you all had a good lunch. I did. So I've been asked this afternoon to give you an overview of what we're really a story of the journey that I've had in establishing an agroforestry system on our own farm. So I farm in the UK, about here, in the eastern counties, and so there's a picture. This is what we call harvesting rain, the same as the harvesting rain that you're experiencing at the moment. I should explain a little bit about our farming system. The farm itself is largely on rented land, so I have a tenancy rental agreement on the farm initially for 15 years. We've just renewed that for another 15 years. I have a small area of land which I own, but the majority of the business is on rented property from a landlord. I'm a first generation farmer, and when we started farming, this was everything we had. I think on my gravestone I would probably have, I started with nothing and I have most of that left. So we started, as my wife and I were first generation farmers, so it was a very big hill to climb to start farming. This is a picture of the farm. My property and my house is here, and we have a main road here, and you can see that it's a flat landscape, and the soils change from this end of the farm, black peat soils, to this end of the farm, brick clay. So 20% organic matter here, 3% organic matter here, and 40% clay. So very, very different. And the area used to be 500 to 1,000 years ago, it was a lake. So the landscape is a gentle slope in this direction, and this would have been a lake. And you can still see here, you can see the old water courses. The picture's here because you can actually see the agroforestry that we planted, and these pictures were taken in about 2011, not long after the agroforestry was established.
I have a question. Which
Yes.
way is north?
North is this direction, about there. Okay, so the trees are in a sort of north-south direction. What does this say? Oh yeah, that's our cropping. So this is where we are with our cropping at the moment, and this gives, for the farmers in the room, this gives you some idea of historic yields and current yields. The farm has been organic now for 12 years, fully certified as organic for 12 years, and we're achieving between 73 to 80% on our yields of when the farm was conventional. The yields have now been increasing as the soil has improved over time. So that gives you some idea of sort of yields between spring and autumn crops, and historically as well. The drivers for change within our farming business really were thinking about when we started farming. The farm had grown wheat, canola, and sugar beets for 30 years. And that was it. It was a very small rotation, and the soils were very exhausted, very tired. And we wanted to build resilience into the business, have a more multifunctional land use, have more diversity within cropping and enterprises, improve our soils, improve our conservation work, and also open up new markets. So these were all our aspirations. So over the last few years, you can see the area of some crops has declined, and the area of some crops has increased as we've got more experience with them, or the markets have changed accordingly. Where are we there? Okay, so we've looked at that one. A few years ago, as you can see from the previous table, we produced up to, I expanded the farming business, and we actually managed under contract another 150 hectares of land, about 40 kilometres away, organically. And at one point we were growing up to 40 hectares of vegetables. I had hair before we started doing that, and we produced great brassicas, but the market was very volatile, and one year we made money and the next year we lost all that money and more. So it was a very difficult, we weren't big enough to be farming with the big producers, and it was a very risky business to be in. So we stopped doing this, and I'll come back to vegetables in a bit. So that was one turning point for me, thinking about how we manage land. And the second was watching some of these very good soils disappear from wind erosion. And as I trained as a soil scientist many years ago when soils were very unfashionable, and this seemed unacceptable to me, and I wanted to find a way of trying to improve and protect our soils, but in a way that I could farm and make money from. As you can see, it was a big issue. So we set about developing an agroforestry system back in 2009, and the limitations on my ability were it needed to my 15-year tenancy agreement meant I needed an economic payback within the period of that tenancy. We had to be compliant with the CAP, because if I'd taken, at the time, 2009, if I'd taken land out of productivity, my landlord would have fined me for degrading the land. I had limited money in my pocket. I needed to be profitable, and actually my tenancy agreement says no livestock. I keep quiet about the livestock that are under my feet, the earthworms. So those were my sort of limitations. And we chose actually to develop a system based on using fruit trees, because the fruit trees became, or have become, windbreaks, but windbreaks that can make me money. The trees aren't too big. They're trees that we could get an economic return on within 15 years, and also where we could open up new markets for the produce. So we have a mixture of heritage varieties and modern varieties, and some have been really good, and some have proven to be not as productive. But they were chosen on a semi-dwarf rootstock, and as you can see, these are the characteristics that we were looking for in terms of juicing or eating, easy to manage, good disease and pest resistance, and importantly late to harvest, so that we can harvest our cereal crops first and then go and harvest our fruit afterwards. So timing is quite important. What have we got next? So when we set about laying out the system, the trees are planted actually in a single row with a 3-meter strip which is sown to a pollen and nectar rich species, because then we bring pollinators in, and we participate in a government Pillar 2 program for environmental measures, and that Pillar 2 strip is also funded under the environmental measures with a pollen and nectar rich area. This is 1.5 meters either side, and then there are 24 meters between the next row. Okay, All the trees were planted as 1-year-old trees with a wooden post, machined post, and a mesh guard and a square 1 metre of, half metre of Mypex underneath for weed control. The trees are planted at a density of 85 trees per hectare over the entire landscape. So this is within the 100 trees per hectare that I mentioned this morning. There was a limitation under the CAP. The interesting thing is that that's 85 trees per hectare over the entire landscape. If I just take the strip here, we have 4,500 trees on 4 hectares of strip. It's 1,100 trees per hectare. It's as intensive as an orchard. But I now look at orchards and think there's a lot of wasted space in orchards for little tractors to run up and down between the trees. Our rows in between have another crop, but a crop that's using a different space and a different time. So when we look at these orchards, they have a different, they have what I think is wasted space just for access for small tractors. So this is what the farm looks like from the air. The house is here, and the agroforestry is on this part of the farm on 52 hectares. We converted this half of the farm to organic in year 1 and this in year 2. I should have done it the other way around and had the trees near the house, but that's history. So this is how it's set out. 24 metre working alley, 3 metre strip, and then a line of trees. I thought all our fields were parallel, but there's always some triangulation of edges. So we set out by putting a tree strip at the edge here, and then every 24 metres until there's one gap left. At the end of every field, there is a turning. The tree rows run 24 metres from the end, so that we can turn machinery, and also so that the water ditches can be maintained and cleared. Well, as you can see there. So the trees were planted in 2009 by hand. So 4,500 trees. We got the school children involved as part of the curriculum. My plan was that when the trees were big, they would all come back and be our pickers. They're now all teenagers and there's no Wi-Fi connection in the field, so they're not interested. But yeah, they're all teenagers now. And then in 2009 in the winter, we had the coldest winter for 30 years. And that was followed by the driest spring in 30 years. So they had a hard start. We've got other research going on the farm, working with the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. We've been monitoring barn owls. The Barn Owl Trust tells us we should have 1 barn owl pair for the size of the farm. We've got 5. And that's because there's lots of insect life. And at dusk, the barn owls go up and down the tree lines hunting for small animals. So it's a smorgasbord of protein for the birds. And then we've been doing other work looking at variety testing, legume testing, working with master students and PhD students. We've had about 3 PhD and about 5 MSc students studying the agroforestry, and then doing our own work on reduced tillage and min-till and zero-till as well. So I showed the picture earlier on. This is one of the PhD students doing insect trapping and looking at the agroforestry, and we've been looking at my neighbour's field, which is managed conventionally, the arable fields managed organically, and the agroforestry managed organically as well. So looking at the differences in insect and biodiversity. And the agroforestry comes out very strongly in terms of things like, so here we have the organic arable crop, the agroforestry crop and the conventional crop, and you can see quite big differences in butterflies and in bumblebees and pollinators between the different land management systems. I'm showing that one. What does that say? No idea. Okay, yield and economics. That's the important bit. So I'm going to have to refer to my notes here because I can't read that in Finnish. So excuse me. When we're looking at sort of yield and economics, there we go. So the capital costs, which have been translated into euros, were about 33,000 euros to set up the agroforestry system on 52 hectares. We were lucky that we managed to get, 64,000 euros. We were lucky that we got some organic conversion grants, not on the fruit really, but on the conversion grants for the land under organic conversion, which helped with that process of transitioning the farm. And then we had to, as you can see, the sort of break even here was about sort of year 6.5, year 7 from the yields of fruit to come back in terms of producing a break even for the investment that we'd made. Our management really is about replanting, pruning and harvesting costs, which I've sort of put down here on a per tree or per hectare basis. When we look at a land equivalent type ratio, and I did this one a couple of years ago, the land equivalent ratio of looking at an apple orchard and organic wheat grown separately versus an agroforestry system, we end up with a more productive system with the agroforestry. And at the time when I did this gave us a land equivalent ratio of about 1.1, so about 10% more. But this is when the trees were young. They're now 10 years old, and that same LER, if I do that again, we're up to about 1.25. So we're within those figures that we showed this morning quite comfortably. There's been other work, not at my own farm, but at Wakelin's Agroforestry with the late Professor Martin Wolf, looking at biomass production. So this is willow and hazel, which is cut for wood chip, then for heating. And the work that's been done there, looking at productivity, clearly shows that there is more productivity in the middle of the alley and at the edge of the alley where the tree and the crop interface. There is a slightly lower productivity, but the overall productivity is greater. And running that through the same land equivalent ratio, even taking into effect the reduced productivity at the edges along the tree strips of the arable crop, you still end up with very good land equivalent ratios here, up to nearly over 1.4 from having wheat and willow grown together, even when accounting for a loss in a reduced productivity from the shaded areas. But as you get further north with latitudes, so in Finland, I think if you're going to run an agroforestry system, it really needs to be north-south, because otherwise the shading impact will have an even greater impact on reducing productivity during the winter months. So yeah, gives LERs of nearly 1.4, well, of over 1.4. To give you some idea, and this is you've done it into euros, well done. This gives you some idea. This is our budgets from last year from productivity. So we're growing organic oats, winter sown oats, which we'd sow in October. The costs of our cultivations and seed, and hand roguing is hand pulling of wild plants, and our harvest costs, we're getting a gross margin of about £1,600 a hectare. Yields are about 6.4 tonnes a hectare on the oats, and then our spring wheats about 5.25 tonnes a hectare, giving us a gross margin of 1,200, and then the fruit at 6 tonnes a hectare, so it's a similar yield, but the value is higher. Our costs are low for with no establishment, but it's just a management and pruning and harvesting cost, and our gross margins are about £1,800 per hectare. So the three together complement each other very well. What does that say?
Pictures.
Oh, pictures. Okay, yeah. So some pictures of the farm, pictures of Whitehall Farm. When we started farming, the lawnmower and the spanners were my toolkit, and when we started farming, all the farming was done by a neighbour who we were paying to do some work. So it was important to make sure that the system fitted modern large-scale machinery. That's a bit bigger than the tractor I use. And when we first started, everything was heavily cultivated, ploughed, and with a 3 metre drill. Even being an organic farmer, we still put on some liquid manganese or magnesium, so to make sure a sprayer can fit down the alleys, to make sure machinery fits is important. Over time, those pollen and nectar, the trees have grown and the pollen and nectar strips have developed, and the crops have been productive. In the winter, clearly we lose a lot of leaf matter onto the ground, and we do some pruning and maintenance. But even in the middle of winter, you can stand by the trees and hear the trees whistling. They talk to you in the winter as the wind comes across, and the trees whistle, which means they're interrupting the wind. If they're interrupting the wind, they're changing the microclimate. We've now adopted a controlled traffic farming system. So all our machinery is now 6 metres. So we have a 6 metre drill and 6 metre rolls, and that's what the farm looks like now, over 52 hectares, or in the spring. Just some pictures. Now the trees have grown. They're like children. They grow quickly when you're not watching. So that's what the farm sort of looks like now. That's about the size of the trees. The trees are about 3 to 4 metres high, and we'll keep them at this height because the wind interruption is on a 1 to 10 ratio. So 3 metres of height will give a 30 metre interruption of wind across the landscape, and these are 27 metres apart, so it's a perfect height which we can then pick from. It's a question.
Now that you mentioned, do you have to take into account the fungal diseases in the strain selection of your crop species when you are blocking the wind, which is then also putting the moisture levels up? We're slowing the wind, but we're not eliminating the wind, so there's still enough wind flow to keep disease levels at acceptable levels. In fact, one of the things we find growing fruit is that we're pretty much disease-free in fruit because there's enough airflow and it's got 2 crops together that we don't have a problem with fungal diseases in the fruit either. But what we are doing is creating lots of edge effect for lots of these beneficial insects to live on. So before we might have problems with aphids in the cereals. Now it's just not a problem because all the ladybirds and larvae have overwintered in these areas, and they've got plenty of food next door to go and eat. Just some pictures. There we go.
So the cereals now are sown, all our cereals are sown on a 22 band, and we use a camera, you can see the camera here, and this is an automated hoe, which we hoe between every row of cereal with a computer guided hoe. They call it robo-crop.
Still about apple trees, so
Yeah.
how do you manage with deer or rabbits or any animals within them?
Okay, so there's a picture there, each of these trees has a guard around it, a mesh, metal mesh. When we planted the trees, from that earlier picture, the mesh was maybe 400 millimeters. We had to go back and put another guard up to 800 millimeters because the rabbits and the hares were coming over the top. The other thing that I hadn't lesson is you can see here that there's a small, what's the Finnish word for bamboo?
Bamboo.
I see. Of course.
That's the only one we can.
Yeah. There's a small bamboo here that the trees were planted with, but there's a tall bamboo here. When we planted the trees in a crop field, we hadn't anticipated we were creating 4,500 roosting places for pigeons. Yeah? When one pigeon comes, not a problem. When his friends come to keep him company, or her company, the trees were getting broken. So we had to put these bamboo canes in for the pigeons to come and sit on the top. Now it's not a problem because the trees are big. But when the trees were young for the first 3 years, we had some breakage, some damage.
Can I ask another question about
Yes.
apples? So, how do you manage irrigation? Do you need irrigation?
It falls from the sky. Our rainfall is about about 650 millimeters a year, but it's sufficient for the apple crops. We haven't had to.
Even of the first and second year?
We worried about this. In fact, the first year we were growing vegetables and we put irrigation for the vegetables, but actually the trees don't need the moisture. They can put their roots down and they're very resilient. So we haven't needed any irrigation.
How about scab? Nothing. And cultivars, are they resistant to soil chemically, or is this a good enough system to keep the scab?
The airflow helps. We've planted scab-resistant varieties. The only pest we've had an issue with is sawfly. I don't know what the Latin would be, but it's a small pest. But we've been putting pheromone traps for that. That's the only issue.
Please, Noora, haluaisitko kertoa, kun tässä tuli tätä keskustelua, se voi kiinnostaa muitakin ehkä ymmärtää. If Noora tells what you discussed.
Yep.
Mä en tunne sitä, ilmeisesti puhutte sitä mistä hyönteisestä puhutte. En mäkään ole varma. Mikä? Joku sahapistiäinen. Niin.
Joo, mutta mä en tiedä mitä vahinkoa se tekee omenapuille.
Niin, eli he eivät siis ole kastelleet puita edes taimivaiheessa, että se sademäärä, mikä siellä luontaisesti on, riittää ja ne puut kasvattaa juuriaan alaspäin koko ajan ja että ovat hyvin kestäviä näihin ilmasto-oloihin ainakin.
Ja sitten toinen, mitä mä kysyin, ne omenanlupi, että he todellakaan ei tarvitse kemiallista torjuntaa tai sitä luomuvaihtoehtoa siihen kemialliseen torjuntaan.
Niin, että on sitä vastustuskykyisiä ne.
Joo, siinä on sekä lajike että todennäköisesti sitä tulee vaikutus.
So one of the reasons for picking fruit is that we're in an area. Our location is that there is fruit, maybe 30-40 kilometers away, but there's very little fruit in the vicinity, which means the disease pressure is very low. Yeah. Historically, there were fruit 100 years ago, but there's no fruit production locally, but close by. So it means the disease pressure is very low. Another of those choices. So that's sort of a picture of what it looks like. I was fortunate to be taken in a vintage plane to take some photographs. So that's sort of what it looks like from above. one lesson that we have learned is that on the farm we have lots of areas for pollen species all around the farm in blocks, and we have had a beekeeper working with us for a number of years, but the beekeeper became ill last year and he stopped beekeeping, and we've seen the impact this year with the reduction in fruit yield because of not having the bees. So we've had some areas which have performed okay, and other areas where the bees haven't travelled to, and the pollination in the fruit set has been low. So we're going to have to become beekeepers as well. Another hat. Because I think it's in an agroforestry system with fruit, it's important because the bees have to travel a further distance. So just some pictures. This was wheat production last year. This is spring sown wheat. Yields about 5.4 tons a hectare. So that's planting, that's combining, same field. These are the sort of oats that we're growing. I'm stood up. They're tall. Winter sown oats, yielding about 6.4 tons a hectare, and that's what it looks like in the agroforestry. So you've got cereal, fruit, some butter, some milk. You have apple pie. It's all in the same field. Yeah, we've done vegetables. Let's come back to that. So we'll control traffic. We'll harvest the cereals with 4. The combine is 6.2 meters, so we'll harvest 4 strips between the rows. The same as the drilling, the same as the hoeing. It's all on a controlled traffic system. Yeah, you can see there. This picture was from last year. So last year it was very dry. We had a drought last summer, and it was the driest year we've had in 100 years. And the trees suffered a little bit on the heavy soils from the drought. Maybe your question about irrigation, maybe irrigation would have helped them, but we're not set up for irrigation either. And so we harvest the cereal, and then we go back in, excuse me, go back in and harvest the fruit. We use local labour. A team will come, just casual labour will come, and we'll give them picking baskets, and they can pick the fruit by hand from the picking basket, and then into the boxes on the back of the tractor, which will then go back to the farm. And we have different varieties, so the different varieties will be kept in different boxes, and then from those we sell some as eating fruit, and then we make some into juice. The only specialist machinery I've bought is this ride-on lawnmower to be able to go between the trees for mowing, and as you can see, the poles for the birds keep the birds on the very top. And then the fruit is the majority of the fruit is sold into the organic marketplace, but increasingly we're making more juice and selling it ourselves, because this building here, I'll show you a picture in a minute, but there's some pictures of the farm. The other thing that we're really keen on is we've been tracking soil quality. So we've been looking at both available nutrients in milligrams per litre, but we've also been looking at base saturations and cation exchange capacities and trace minerals, and also looking at biological analysis, because what I'm particularly interested in is how we've changed the soils from a bacterial dominated soil to a fungal dominated soil over a period of about 7 to 10 years, and now we have very good levels of fungi in the soil and actually the mycorrhizae populations have been going up, and we're getting good levels of active fungi in the soil. So the controlled traffic farming system has meant that we're not trafficking all over the farm, and we're keeping all our wheelings in one place. And the agroforestry alley system lends itself to a controlled traffic farming system because you've put these strips in which regulate where the machinery travels. Under a normal situation, you'd be covering maybe 80% of the ground. We're making sure we're covering only the areas that we need to put machinery on to reduce the consolidation and compaction. The GPS system on the tractors means that we are now, with the inter-row hoeing for weed control, we're actually sowing legumes and cover crops into the base of our cereals. So we're creating a 3-tiered system. So we have the trees, we have the cash crop of cereal, and we have a legume in the base. So that the solar panels that I talked about this morning are always turned on, because the solar panels here are turning off, the solar panels here are starting, and the trees are solar panels as well. So the solar panels are always turned on, always building carbon, but always putting sugars and starches into the soil to make the system work. With the oats themselves, we're actually growing. We're one of 3 farms in the UK actually growing a gluten-free certified oat. So the oats go to a specialist mill, which is just a gluten-free. Gluten-free, yeah, is that the right one? Yeah. So a specialist market. I have an interest because I'm celiac myself, so I have an interest in this business, and so we're actually growing specialist oats with an organic premium and a gluten-free premium. And then because we have a desire to interact with the public, we turned one of our stores, we did 18 months ago, we did some building work and created a farm shop for the farm itself, and now we have a farm shop on the farm which is selling produce to farmers. So I can't read that. With agroforestry, we need to think about a sort of a shift in the way we think about things. Some of the things that aren't obvious. So we had to think about security. Maybe it's a bigger issue with a population of 67 million people, but when you plant a young tree, we were worried about these young trees growing legs and moving off the farm and becoming for sale on a market somewhere. We had to put new gates in. In fact, in year 4, we went to harvest one field of fruit, and I scratched my head and had to ask my wife, did we harvest this field? And she said no. And when we went to the field, we found plastic carrier bags in the field, and over one night, somebody had come and taken all the apples out of one field. Probably about 5 tons. I wanted to hire them back because they were very good pickers. But yeah, they got stolen. I've seen the 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Okay, yeah. Obviously weather had a bit of an issue. We had to do some re-guarding. The gentleman asked me at the back about the guards for the rabbits. The pigeons and birds were a bit of a problem that we didn't see. Road safety, something to be aware of. We have the road running around the edge of the farm, and I think every farmer has been driving like this. What's that over here? So the road safety is a bit of a danger, and also with planes, small aircraft. Now they come and they go, what's this? And they come and circle. just to see. So we're like a magnet for light aircraft. Soil is important for our future existence, and what we try to do is create a farming system which builds soil resilience. One of the really important things for me was mixing perennial crops, the tree, with annual crops, because with climate change, I'm helping build resilience into our farming system. If we have a good year on fruit, the cereals might be down. If we have a good year on cereals, the fruit might be down, but it gives us resilience. So there's a lot of talk about sustainable intensification of agriculture. I think this is ecological intensification. It's taking the lessons from nature of mixing perennials and annuals and trees and crops and trying to build that resilience. It improves the resource use and capture. Profitability is as good, if not better. It's improving biodiversity. Trees of densities of 80 to 120 trees per hectare seems to work well on alleys 26 metres apart. The annual crops give us our regular income on 92% of the land, and 8% of the land is the tree crop, giving us the icing on the cake. Still working on the policy. So many years ago, I think many of us have seen where houses have become multi-storey. I'm not sure what's going on in this building at the moment. That's Downing Street in number 10, so it's just the madhouse, I think. but multi-storey, using the space above, using the space below. Agroforestry can be a smart option for climate change. Farmers could easily plant. You don't need to do the whole farm. If you're a bigger farm, just do a small area. There's no requirement to do the whole farm, just do a small bit. Our own calculations would suggest that 5.8% of the land area would meet our climate change obligations, and we're at 8%. So we're tick. And trees will grow in most places. There's very few places they won't grow other than the Arctic and the Antarctic. Maybe right in the north of Finland it might be a little bit too severe for some trees. But even doesn't have to be a tree, it can be a shrub. But it's one of the few systems where we can build more biomass and productivity, harvest more sunlight, and we don't need more inputs. Most require more inputs to get more output. If you haven't seen it, this is a new only in English at the moment, a new handbook on agroforestry. That's, if you put into Google the agroforestry handbook, this is a free download as a PDF. So that has agroforestry design, productivity, economics, some good data in there. Yeah, the one thing I would say is, when we go outside this afternoon, just take a moment to look up and look down and think that the farm could get bigger just by farming in a three-dimensional way. Stop. Questions?
Now I think we can have those questions we didn't have time earlier.
There was a question or talk about the complexity in these systems. Has it resulted in more complicated farming also, or has it just been more resilient and kind of easier to farm two crops at the same time than two separately?
It is more complex. So there is more complexity, but it's manageable.
But it's not complicated.
No. One of the other benefits I haven't spoken about is as a small farm, it was a challenge to have enough work for a full-time employee on the farm. The trees give me that additional work for the employee. So in the winter, when there is not much work to do on the arable cropping, there is work to do on trees. So it spreads the workload, which helps for the business. So
then another kind of question. Have you found with your field experience on your fields and when you have been giving this kind of talks, is there any kind of single thing that you could do to help farmers understand and start using these kind of methods? What would be the thing to do to get one farmer to start doing something like this?
I think this is an ongoing issue, and I think the most important thing is to try and go and visit a farm that's doing agroforestry, because it's much easier to understand it if you're stood in the fields with agroforestry than if you're just reading about it.
We all thank you for the invitation.
Okay, come. Just come. Thin air, special
We
deal.
can check the calendars later.
Special deal. I encourage colleges to develop agroforestry systems so that there are places farmers can see, and encourage. I picked up. I hope you've all picked up. There's a leaflet outside with Affinet. I don't know who's running the Affinet program here in. That's right, yeah. So we run the Affinet program in the UK with the Organic Research Centre, and this is a really good resource for information, and also there's some great videos. So learn to farm by YouTube. There's some great videos on Affinet about different agroforestry systems, and the biggest blockage in agriculture is just above the shoulders and just between the ears, and you just have to open your mind to thinking that these kind of things are possible.
Here.
Oh, yeah, go on. And then that one.
So what about you? You have this success story of transition to agroforestry, well, parts of the time. But in any case, if we're going to have it systematic, let's say normal way to farm, even that kind of like not to say this kind of very diverse agroforestry, 5-level stuff. But what kind of system and thing, at European level, for example, what should it be? What should be done in terms of system, in terms of the EU policy making?
So what I've been talking to policymakers in Brussels and at home domestically about is an agriculture that allows multifunctional land use. At the moment, the CAP, because of its structures, stifles innovation. It says you have to farm to this particular way. If you have 2 crops in a field, there's no box on the form for 2 crops. You can only have 1 crop. So it stifles innovation. The other thing is, I think it also stifles cooperation. So I don't necessarily have the skills to manage trees, but I'm a very good cereal grower. I'm learning about trees all the time. Every day is a school day. But maybe I can partner with somebody who is a really good tree manager, and I'm the really good crop manager, but we can't occupy the same parcel under the CAP. So multifunctional land use, multi-operator land use. That will transform agriculture. So from policy, that's where policy needs to go, I think.
Okay, what's the
There was that chap at the back's been asking for ages, and then this one.
I was just wondering, like, have you been happy with your landing distance of 3 meters, or have you experienced it
The 3 metre works, I think, is a good compromise because it's about where the canopy is about 3 metres. Although I've just had a text from my tractor driver saying he's broken the mirror on the tractor, so maybe they need to be wider.
Or a narrow track.
Or a narrow tractor, yeah. 3 metres seems to work about okay, and that was partly because we needed to be able to mow alongside the trees. Yeah. If you needed access before the cereals were harvested, maybe 1.5 metres one side and 4 metres the other side. Doesn't need to be equal, so you can get a tractor or a vehicle. The second question, part of the question.
If you have something that
Yeah. I have, and we've looked at soft fruit, gooseberries, raspberries, but life is at the moment complicated enough. I did have an idea of. I was chatting with a gentleman there at lunchtime. I have a friend in France that is growing truffles under his trees, so he has truffles which are very valuable, and then the trees, and then the crops. But I found that truffles don't associate with apple malice trees. Damn. So yeah, but we have been thinking about those things as well. There was a question here.
Joo, siis ihan puukujan tästä myös, että meillähän on erilainen ilmasto ja maaperä kuin Britanniassa ja Keski-Euroopassa. Ja meillä on salaojat 10-15 metrin väleissä noin metrin syvyydessä. Ja meidän pitää ottaa tämä huomioon, eli tässä puukujanteessa meidän pitää sitten kasvattaa sellaisia puita, joiden juuret eivät ulotu sinne salaojan syvyyteen, eli korkeintaan metrin syvyyteen ulottuvat, tai sitten tehdä jotain muuta, korjata sitä salaoitusta. Et se on,
tai sijoitella puut sen mukaan, miten salaojat on.
Haluatko sä Iiris kääntää?
Joo, mutta ensin on yleensä pellot salaoitettu ja sitten tuodaan puut sinne. Ja salaojien suunta on usein epäedullinen sen puurivien kanssa.
Ja sitten ne puurivit voi joko katkoa siitä kohtaa, missä salaoja on, ja jättää sinne turvaetäisyyden, tai voi pistää umpiputkeen.
Niin umpiputki on ratkaisu, mutta puujuuret menevät myös alaspäin.
Kyllä.
Vaikka ne katkaisee ne
No,
juuret.
esimerkiksi omenat ei ilmeisesti hakeudu salaoja. I'm sorry, I'm
Answering.
She's answering, yes.
Which has to do with the drainage. Yes, the subsoil drainage, and if you have the drainage
Yes.
there, you need to plan your system according to that. Or his question was,
Yeah.
kysymys oli,
Että pitää olla lyhytjuurisia puita tai pensaita, jotta se onnistuu parhaiten.
so you need to have short rooted
Yeah, great.
species.
So when we planted the trees, or wanted to plant the trees, the landowner had 2 questions. One, drainage with the pipe drains. Will it damage the pipe drains? Secondly, if you leave the farm because you're a tenant, you have to take the trees with you. Yeah. So I had to sign a document. But my plan is to make the farm so complicated they can't let it to anybody else. On the drainage, I found some research work from Canada where they'd looked at the drainage, and the answer is very simple. That first, don't plant willow because the roots are very big. Secondly, you have rain maintenance. Yeah, because in the winter the trees, they're not looking for water, they're dormant. In the summer, so the drains can run in the winter. If you don't maintain the drains and the water ponds in the drains in the summer, the roots will go looking for the water. So if you maintain the drains, they'll be dry in the summer, the trees won't go looking.